welcome to the first series of ICAR's virtual annual meeting breakout sessions. This issue is one that I think is critically important to the future of the movement, right? If we don't teach business and human rights in effective ways, the ability for groups like ICAR to function from kind of a common set of knowledge and direction becomes all the more challenging. I'm going to turn it over to Meg Roggensack, who knows ICAR better than most and has kind of been engaged, I think, with a number of our members and partners, and so has both deep expertise on what it takes within NGOs to get meaningful movement, but also within the academic institutions. Just for those of you who are joining, who are new to chat and new to Zoom functions, we want this conversation to be as dynamic as possible, and so please, if you are able, understanding that there are a lot of childcare and other challenges going on right now, we invite you to join via video and to pipe in when, if, and how you deem appropriate, but also we will keep the chat open if you're more comfortable plugging in questions there. This session is being recorded. Our hope is to make it available to those who were not able to join. And with that, I think I'll turn it over to Meg.
Well, thank you, Allison, for your leadership and for this wonderful opportunity for us to gather as a profession and as a field. It is not easy to do what you do, let alone in a pandemic, and we're so grateful to you for this program and for the opportunity to be a part of it, but also to you and Melissa for all of your hard work to facilitate not only our engagement, but the engagement of our colleagues. ICAR has been really has had a special place for the field. You have taken in so many of our interns over the years, have hired many of our students, and have produced a variety of materials that we use regularly in our classes. And for the field, that's important because it's a new and growing and dynamic field. And so often the work that ICAR is doing is really helping inform the way we think about these issues and then how we teach them, as well as coming into our classes and sharing your knowledge. So we feel a deep familial relationship to ICAR, and I really appreciate the opportunity to be part of this program. So I'm Meg Roggensack, as Allison said. I'm the co-director with Anthony Ewing of the Teaching Business and Human Rights Forum, and we're joined by Rachel Chambers, who's the co-chair of our webinar series, which was initiated this spring in the advent of COVID. But I also want to recognize Nina Gardner, who was one of the founders of our Teaching Forum, and who's here with us today and has been really deeply involved in a lot of the work we'll be describing today. You know, I was going to begin just by asking the group, you know, how many of you have taken a business and human rights course or have hired somebody who has taken a business and human rights course, because I think when many of us started, there was no such offering to be had. I forget, Kendall, if you took a course, taught a course, can you remind us? Taught, exactly. Yeah, and you've definitely hired some of the students that we've trained, many of them, and Nina, of course, has taught. Kim, you're coming up in the field and going to be learning from Evelyn. So, so in any event, we have a couple of questions that Rachel's going to put up that are going to just kind of inform the discussion we'll have in a minute. So maybe Rachel, if you could just get those up for a second. Just want you to take a look at these quickly. What we're going to do is I'm going to turn it over to Anthony to talk a little bit just about the history of our organization, and then for us to talk about the kinds of things that we've been doing since the COVID crisis and innovating in a couple of different areas. And then we'll turn it over to the group just to talk about these questions. Really, our goal when we asked to be part of this was the notion that we are most effective when we work together. And that means that we are training the next generation of leaders, but our training has to be informed, as I said, by the advocacy work. It has to connect to the advocacy work and be relevant to it. And it also needs to connect to the work of scholars. And these all, interrelate. How we think about the issues, what we know about the issues, and how we together advance the field. So these are just the questions that we thought might be good for us to talk about after we do a little bit of a formal presentation. So with that, I'll turn it over to Anthony just to give you a little bit of background on the Teaching Forum and kick off our program today.
Great, thanks Meg, and thanks to ICAR and Allison and Melissa for giving us this opportunity. It really is an important connection between those of us teaching business and human rights and our students who go on to do many things, but many of our students tend to be self-selected human rights advocates and hopefully find their way to the organizations represented by ICAR. And if we're doing our jobs well, we are exposing them to business and human rights topics and giving them tools and language and conceptual frameworks to advise advocacy organizations or to be advocates, as well as some of them end up advising companies or working for companies or working as, if they're coming from a law school, working as in-house counsel or outside counsel. So a little bit of background on myself. I actually am in that unique situation that a long time ago, I took a business and human rights course because when I was at Columbia Law School, I went and founded one of the first courses of its kind at the Columbia Business School, taught at that time, developed at that time by Diane Orntlicker and others. And then I ended up, since 2001, teaching the business and human rights course at Columbia University, originally at the business school and more recently at the law school. So I've been teaching the topic for a long time, and I've really seen the field grow, and I've seen demand for business and human rights education grow, and I've seen the supply of business and human rights educators grow. And that is what gave rise to the Teaching Business and Human Rights Forum with my colleague Joanne Bauer, who teaches at the School of International Affairs at Columbia University. I'm teaching at the law school. We launched the forum in 2011 when we realized that there was a critical mass of individuals teaching this subject. And we were looking for an opportunity to collaborate with others and to share challenges and issues and strategies to improve our teaching and to promote business and human rights education. So in 2011, we convened a workshop at Columbia University, and we had about 12 individuals teaching business and human rights in some form, coming from the US and from the UK. And from that initial workshop almost 10 years ago, we launched the Teaching Business and Human Rights Forum, which has become a unique platform for collaboration among individuals teaching the subject worldwide, in teaching it without respect to school, without respect to discipline. The common denominator is simply teaching business and human rights. We have individuals teaching in law schools, teaching in business schools, teaching in schools of public policy, and even more recently, teaching modules or courses undergrad. And I'm pleased to say that today we count about 350 individuals who are engaged in the network, teaching at some 200 institutions in 45 countries worldwide. And that illustrates growth in business and human rights education, the growth of the business and human rights field as both an academic discipline and a field of practice and a field of advocacy over the past decade. And through this network of collaboration, we've developed and provide a number of resources. We can go to the next slide. Forum resources include a discussion board for members where individuals can post questions, can post announcements about new scholarship, new resources for teaching in the classroom, and ask questions of one another on a whole range of business and human rights topics, from pedagogy to content to policy. We have, from the beginning, a syllabi bank. So those of us who submit a syllabus, a BHR syllabus or module, have access to everyone else's. And that's been very helpful, both for those of us who have been teaching for a while who might want to add a new topic to their teaching, but also for individuals who are proposing a business and human rights course for the first time. We now count some 80 syllabi that are in that syllabi bank, and they include syllabi at all different faculties, from prominent individuals like John Ruggie's syllabus at Harvard or Mike Posner's syllabus at NYU Stern, but also in many different geographies, and we're starting to get our first syllabi in Spanish or in Portuguese, for example. We have hosted in-person teaching workshops. Last year, we hosted our 8th in-person workshop, the first outside of the US. It was hosted in the UK at the University of Essex. We had wonderful plans, and plans were underway in conjunction with the Global BHR Scholars Association to host this month an in-person workshop at the University of Monterrey in Mexico. Unfortunately, that was impossible because of the pandemic, but we have developed other resources like webinars, and Rachel is going to speak about the webinar series to connect teachers of BHR during the pandemic as everyone switches to fora like this remotely. And finally, the syllabi bank is password protected, only accessible to those who submit a syllabus. To take some of that intellectual capital and make it public, we in 2016 launched the Teaching BHR Handbook, which is publicly available at bhrhandbook.org. And I'll speak a little bit later on in the program about the handbook and the teaching notes on common topics available there. I think collectively that the forum's activities, and most importantly, the efforts of the forum members, have successfully promoted and strengthened business and human rights education worldwide in quite a dramatic fashion over the past 10 years or so. And that's what's exciting about seeing what members of this network are doing. So that's a little bit of background, and let me stop there and turn it back over to Meg and Rachel to talk about some of our current activities.
Thank you. Thank you, Anthony. Rachel, can you restore the screen for a minute? Can we remove the slide deck? Thank you. So I wanted to talk a little bit about how we started responding to the COVID crisis. For many of us teaching in the spring, the crisis hit roughly early March. And some of our institutions were kind of immediately on top of that and really focused mostly on orienting us to what were, for many of us, unfamiliar technology platforms, whatever platform our institution had, and a crash course on just getting the rudiments of that in place. And as Anthony, I think, alluded to, very little on the pedagogy. And so I just had the thought that maybe we could use some collective hand-holding about this jump we were about to take into the unknown world of online teaching. And we convened a call just to discuss that has turned into a regular weekly call for anyone that would like to come and talk about the challenges of teaching. We started out really, it was to just get us oriented, and it has really morphed into the question of how do we embrace and really make this excellent? And what can we do, including partnering with ICAR and ICAR members to really kind of break the boundaries of what can be done online. As I mentioned, where we started was really thinking about, what are the rudiments of this tool that we have, and thinking about then how can we use the tools at our disposal. So we had a series of sessions looking at different ways to use breakout rooms or polling functions. Nina one week brought in a Jeopardy game that she had created, and we played Jeopardy, and it was wonderful. And so fun ways to engage students and use the tools that are at our disposal. We also brought in students, and we heard from students, what was your experience in spring in learning online, shifting from in-person to online, and be brave and tell us what you think and tell us what suggestions you may have. And they made a number of really practical suggestions and then some more substantive suggestions that have really helped inform our thinking. A couple of the things that have come out of the conversation that we'll be talking about further are that one of the things we immediately realized was this is a dynamic community that we have, and it has a heart and a soul, and people wanted to be part of this community in a new way. And they saw in this not only a way to help one another, but to think more deeply about the obligation we have to the field. So first was help each other, zoom into somebody's class to give them a break as they're scrambling to get up to speed, but also more broadly thinking about our colleagues that are standing up classes in other parts of the world. We had earlier, through the ABA's Rule of Law initiative, started to meet with our colleagues in Pakistan. They had come here, we had had a session with them in Washington and also in Boston. They then invited some of us in person to come out and see them, and some of our members did. Once we went virtual, we had some relationships in place, and we could zoom in to see them and invite them to come and visit us. And so that has been a really nice experience and helped us understand that we can support one another globally, but we can also learn from one another globally. And that brings me to something we're beginning to start to stand up, which is a broader speaker roster that includes not just our own members, but other people that we've typically had in class, many from ICAR, from companies, from investor groups, from other nonprofits who perennially do the wonderful work of coming in and helping our students understand the perspectives of these issues from the seat that they occupy, which is invaluable. It's something that's hard otherwise to convey. Well, we realized that thinking about where we could go with this, that one of the ways we want to talk about in this session is, as we talk with advocates like ICAR members about the real challenges in the field that have become even more difficult to monitor and engage on, how can we start to bring the advocates into our classroom in real time? And how can we bring some of the cases into our classroom, maybe even construct some simulated exercises and be dynamic about it? Many of our students are from all parts of the world, and they want to hear about examples from their own countries and communities and work on those problems in a collective way. And so we're hungry for more collaborations of this type and the opportunities that we have with this virtual world that we have now been immersed in. So that conversation continues on a weekly basis, but it has spawned, as I mentioned, a number of these other initiatives. And so I want to turn it over now to Rachel, who has been my co-director in a webinar series that we initiated in the spring to start to think about other ways we could support our field going forward in the pandemic. So Rachel, over to you.
Thank you, Meg. I'm going to share the screen again, just so you guys can see the topics of the webinars so far. And also I'll show you some future topics. So just to answer your very first questions, Meg, and to give me a bit of history about me. So I audited, I think, one of the first business and human rights courses that was offered in the UK, which was Sheldon Leader's course at the University of Essex. Sheldon, of course, is one of the original Teaching Forum members as well, and he was my PhD supervisor when I went through and did my PhD at the University of Essex. And then to your question, have I hired? I initially thought no, and then of course I remembered I worked at the Global Compact for a while, and yes, I did hire, in fact, from Joanne's class. So it all sounds very cozy, but I think it's, these are important questions to ask ourselves as we consider how we teach. Now I find myself teaching at the University of Connecticut, trying to find internships for my students and thinking about how to prepare them to be best placed to get those internships and to do a great job and ultimately to get into the world of work of business and human rights. So thanks for those questions. Turning to the webinars. So obviously the original plan this year was to meet in person in Monterey, and that was not to be. But because we were all pivoting to the online world, it seems an obvious choice to organize webinars within the Teaching Forum. And the first webinar that we did, as you can see on the list, 3 years on how the French law and the corporate duty of vigilance influenced human rights due diligence, was a huge success and the first of the series. This law has now been in place for 3 years, and we've seen companies starting to report and to conduct the due diligence under it. And we're also starting to see, obviously, litigation through the courts in France where companies have done insufficient, or it's alleged that companies have done insufficient with regards to the law. We're also obviously seeing the current legislative developments in the European Union with proposals in place for an EU-wide due diligence law. So this webinar, which featured not just John Ruggie, which was obviously lovely to have kind of the original human rights Ewing Guiding Principles person and join us, but also the law firm Herbert Smith in Paris, Stéphane Babant and Elsa Savary from there, and then practitioners Sandra Cossard, and also from Total, one of the companies currently in court in France. So that was obviously interesting for us to have him with us, the General Counsel from Total. So following that and moving on to the second bullet point, we had applying a business and human rights lens to the COVID-19 pandemic. So this obviously was a subject close to our hearts, and Anthony and I moderated it, and Anthony was one of the panelists. We also brought in Monica Gorman, who is Vice President at New Balance in charge of responsible leadership and global compliance. And she also sits on the board of the Fair Labor Association. So it was great to have her viewpoint both as a corporate facing many challenges during the pandemic, but also in her capacity at the Fair Labor Association to look at sort of how the Fair Labor Association had been pushing companies to respond more responsibly in the face of the pandemic. And then lastly, we had Mike Posner from NYU Stern, who gave his, as ever, erudite viewpoint on how you teach this subject, what the pandemic means for the future of business and human rights teaching and practice, as well as sort of drilling down onto these questions about how the Fair Labor Association was addressing this with its members. Then just recently this month, we had sort of back-to-back 2 webinars, non-state-based grievance mechanisms and expert discussion on new legal and policy developments. So this webinar featured Eric Beale, also from the Fair Labor Association, but also an academic, Antonella Angelini from Columbia University, and then 2 practitioners, Hannah Clayton from the International Council on Mining and Metals, and Mick Bride, who's the Vice President Corporate Responsibility at PVH, who also had worked quite considerably on the Bangladesh Accord and was familiar very much with that process as well. So this was a really interesting webinar looking at the role of non-state-based grievance mechanisms. There's been quite a few policy developments in this field, work from the OHCHR and the International Commission of Jurists recently come out. And so they were, the panelists and moderator were discussing, what are the functions of these mechanisms? What are our reasonable expectations for them going forward? And the sort of limits of them as expressions of transnational governance. Diving into some of the kind of more thorny issues around non-state-based mechanisms. And then lastly on this slide, how human rights impact assessments can contribute to to responsible business conduct. So this webinar was organized in conjunction with the Danish Institute for Human Rights, and it marked the publication of a book the handbook on human rights impact assessment. I think, Kendall, you were one of the authors in that. So it's obviously an edited work that Nora Gottsman from the Danish Institute brought together, and she was the moderator of this panel, which also included Sarah Seck from the Teaching Forum, and then Oxfam, Irit Tamir, and a representative of Nestle. So we had a really interesting conversation about the kind of state of the art in terms of human rights impact assessments, looking at different approaches, company commissioned, community-based, and sector-wide impact assessments and approaches, and how to do it, what the practitioner experience has been, where the criticism is, what future directions there are for this field. And that very well attended webinar, like the previous two on the slide, so the second, third, and fourth on the bullet points will all be available to click on the Teach BHR website in the near future. So you'll be able to revisit those webinars. The first one was conducted under Chatham House rules and it isn't available. So that's sort of where we've reached to date. And, my next slide shows some examples of future webinars. I mean, you won't be surprised to hear my question for you is going to be, where does your interest lie? Where have you attended these webinars? I know, Nina, for example, you have. What else can we do essentially to further the field through these webinars? And so obviously we'd be interested to hear, your views on the future topics. The ones I've got up here, first of all, breaking down silos in business and human rights teaching and practice. So this is something which I think comes up in many different contexts, whether it be teaching in business schools versus law schools, whether it be silos between practitioners and academics, many different silos and many different approaches there. The next on the slide, transnational corporations and human rights, overcoming barriers to judicial remedy. So this obviously is Gwyn Skinner's book, which was published this year, and which myself and Sarah McGrath, obviously formerly of ICAR, worked on after Gwyn died. So it's a great book. Obviously, I wholeheartedly recommend it, but I think I would love to have a webinar in which we obviously celebrate the book and the contribution that Gwyn made to the scholarship in this field and to the advocacy in this field, but also look at what's the latest on this litigation that she wrote about, so I'm planning to bring in practitioners and scholars from the UK, Canada, as well as the US, to look at where this litigation is headed now, some years after she's died, and what the future holds in regard to this litigation. So that's coming up. And then I've also said UNGP's 10+ next decade. Obviously, there's going to be an ICAR session on this next week on Tuesday with Sarah Blackwell. But I would love to hear teachers, or give teachers of business and human rights and the sort of webinar crowd the opportunity to engage on this subject. Hence a webinar, and that would be something we'd like to do. And then not on this slide, but other sort of ideas that we have in the works. A webinar on diversity, equality and inclusion, picking up from the theme the first day of ICAR on Monday, and the challenge that Alison gave to us all to really work harder on this question and incorporate it into our business and human rights thinking. And then lastly, another book that's recently been published, When Business Harms Human Rights, Affected Communities That Are Dying to Be Heard, which is Jenna Martin and Tara Van Hoe's edited work, bringing through victim voices into scholarship in business and human rights. That's also a webinar in the works. So just to finish up from me, my questions for now or for later, as I said before, have you attended these webinars? What subjects would you like us to address in future webinars? So I'll let those questions hang. Thank you so much.
So I would suggest we have kind of a short period of time left, and I know, Anthony, you wanted to cover a little bit the notes, but maybe we could make that a little bit more abbreviated just to enable some time for conversation. Would that be all right?
Sure.
Thanks.
Let's just make a couple key points, and as Rachel puts up those slides. So the teaching handbook, as I mentioned, was intended to take the content from our teaching collectively and make it public. And we compiled a list of common topics in BHR courses and we invited members of the forum to author teaching notes on topics that they teach. They follow, the audience are teachers. It's intended to be a survey of a topic focused on items, teaching resources, teaching questions that have proved particularly useful or helpful teaching that topic from the perspective of the author. All the notes follow a similar format, an overview, teaching approaches, key questions, teaching resources. In a positive development, we've been, over the past year, we've been making an effort to make Teaching Forum resources more accessible worldwide. And thanks to some pro bono assistance of a couple law firms, we've been able to publish a number of Spanish translations of teaching notes. We have received some French translations, and they will be published, edited and published soon as well. And let me just, if we can go to the next slide. So you'll see that the highlighted topics are, we've published 14 notes to date. The not highlighted topics, unhighlighted topics, are topics that are in the pipeline that are very common in BHR courses that we'd love to publish notes on. Some of them are in the pipeline. Let me just highlight two examples of notes and connect it to advocates and ICAR. And for ICAR members for their consideration. One note is the most recently published note on human rights and the environment by Sarah Seck. And this is a wonderful example of using a teaching note as an opportunity to promote a relatively new or on the horizon topic for inclusion in BHR courses. One way that teachers use the handbook is if they're looking to add a topic to their syllabus, and perhaps they haven't taught it in the past. I've never been able to fit applying a BHR lens to environmental issues in my course, but Sarah Seck produced a note, and I may be able to do it when I next teach because of the note that Sarah published and the resources that she compiled, highlighting key questions like which human rights are affected by environmental impacts, how do environmental harms cause or contribute to adverse human rights impacts. And by reviewing this note, I feel that I have a minimum level of competence to perhaps add this important topic. And others in the teaching network are focusing courses even on this. For example, Kiara Maki has taught in Ethiopia a class on climate change, migration, and human rights in the context of sub-Saharan Africa. And that's a wonderful example of the maturation of the field and teaching BHR, really applying teaching to a specific geography and the needs of local rights holders. So that's one example of a note that promotes an issue and promotes its inclusion in BHR courses. And I would argue that advocates could use that kind of tool to promote issues that perhaps aren't being covered currently in BHR courses. And then I'll just mention in closing another example. Teaching notes can address current issues, and that's what we did with the human rights and the COVID-19 pandemic. This was top of mind, obviously, to many of us who were teaching in the middle of the pandemic. So together with Nina, who's on this call, and together with Jamie O'Connell at Stanford Law School, we put together a note on applying a BHR lens to the COVID-19 pandemic, highlighting issues like critically assessing corporate responses through a business and human rights lens. So those are two examples, using teaching notes to promote a new topic, but also using a teaching note to address a current topic. And I'll leave it there so we have time for discussion.
Great. Yes, so thank you so much, Anthony. And just to underscore that Meetings like the ICAR meeting are also extremely helpful to us in understanding where the field is going, where it's headed. In previous years, the focus, for example, this year and in prior years on human rights defenders has, I think, really helped us think about how we bring the issues that advocates face into the classroom. I don't know, Rachel, if you can restore the screen so we can, yeah, great. I think, we have limited time left. I want to give the floor to Allison. We've thrown out a number of questions, but I think one of the reasons we've most wanted to come, and Melissa as well, is how can we work more creatively and innovatively with you in this virtual environment? I think we really do want to think about fresh ways to bring, these issues into the classroom in a lively way and in a purposeful way. We're not only teaching, but many of us are running clinics still, or practicum-oriented classes where we can, also make some headway on issues that matter to us both. And so we're really looking for sort of fresh ways to collaborate. Clearly, cases or case exercises are one area where we could be more creative. So Allison, not to put you on the spot, but I would just love to hear any thoughts you may have about, kind of breaking down the silos and innovating, going forward in this space.
Thank you for your very comprehensive presentation. I guess two immediate thoughts come to mind, and I will say I'm coming at this from somebody who's been involved in the space, who's always been drawn to the idea that if you could get supply chains to work in the right direction, you could have a sustainable model for really advancing human rights around the world, and also have lived a rather quirky career and now find myself as executive director of an organization where Melissa and I think, are the only non-lawyers engaged in the substance of the work. I did go to business school, and I think the absence of content at business schools that speak to, I think there, at least in my experience, there was one or two kind of throwaway cases about why human rights was a moral thing that impacted a bottom line, but there were no cases that were brought to my attention within the context of business classes that talked about the value to a company of engaging on this, and certainly nothing quantitative. And I found myself in a series of business classes where there was just a skepticism and kind of a, naivete about, a perceived naivete for somebody who cared about these issues as how much it connected. And I think insofar as Harvard Business School is the anchoring business case promulgator, having a really robust set of cases that speak to the bottom line associated with a lot of these pieces, and both the legal compliance risks and the profit risks, and all of the tools at businesses' disposal around risk analysis, total system cost, kind of all of those pieces that could be easily leveraged to advance human rights and aren't, matters. And then secondarily, I think the connections between the legal background for this and kind of legal teaching around this and what effective advocacy looks like are tenuous a lot, and having better practical skill sets around what a law would do, how you evaluate the political realities, and the policy implementation practicalities of something like that would make a huge difference to the field.
Thank you, Ellison. That's a wonderful set of suggestions. Nina, I wanted to offer you a little bit of the floor because you have been a key part of this from the beginning. You've been involved in all of the things we've discussed in a major way, including a lot of leadership on the calls, on the teaching note, in terms of helping with the webinars. So I just wanted to offer you any opportunity for any additional thoughts you may want to raise.
Thanks, Meg. I just think that this is an amazing group, and it's thanks to Anthony and Joanne at the beginning, who sort of showed that there was, that it was really useful to gather what was a fledgling group of professors in this field to a major burgeoning field. 350 professors around the world is really extraordinary, and I think it's an undercount, to use an expression, by far. And I think we're all trying to teach not only in the sort of macro level, but really try and teach our theory, but teach our students some practical elements on, how to do human rights impact assessments and other, really specific ways, so that when they go into a company, or if they come into ICAR or any of these, or industry groups, they really are coming at it from a very practical way. And I'm including also some of my students that go into DRL at State. And how are they preparing? Hopefully we are starting to prepare our diplomats around the world, but in the US as well, as to business and human rights issues for those who are economic counselors around the world. So really sort of how to apply what we're trying to teach them to everything from government, business, and of course NGOs and civil society that are so important, not to mention the legal field. So I just think that it's exciting to see our students grow and take. One of my students has just left Amazon after 4 years. She couldn't take it anymore, but she feels like she tried and she made it an impact. And debriefing these students and hearing that, Apple brought up the UN guiding principles in an investor call last week. It's starting to penetrate. And that's very exciting, because to hear from me with the work I do with investors, I know my students are getting into those companies and starting to tell explain to these companies they have to be, conversant on the guiding principles and start doing these kind of impact assessments and due diligence. So I think it's because all the people on the call who've been teaching, we've been making an effort. I think it's starting to pay off. And it's still early in days. So I think in 20 years, I think we will have made quite an impact. I think the world will be very different.
Yeah. And Ellison, thank you for mentioning the business schools. So this group includes business schools, but we do feel that we need to do more to engage business schools. And it would be useful to circle back to later and talk a little bit about that, because I think we need to think creatively about doing more with that. They are going to be the boardroom and suite occupants, and we need to do more to inform that teaching and widen our platform. Kim, would you like to contribute anything before we sign off?
This all just sounds amazing. I've not, as we talked about before, I've not had an opportunity to take the specific business and human rights class yet, but I've been involved from the first day I walked in the door with the Center for Business and Human Rights at OU Law. And our program specifically has done a great job of making sure, even when Professor Oswald, the director, was on sabbatical last year, they've done a great job of bringing in people in the field, including, oddly, where it seems odd to me, leaders from, you know, oil companies and things, who, you know, I mean, it's good bringing people into the fold and getting them to consider these issues in contexts where they're often the most disregarded. And I've also had an opportunity to work with an international human rights clinic during my time in school, where we dealt with human rights abuses related to the pineapple industry in Costa Rica, which is perpetuated by American companies. So everything you're saying sounds like the kinds of things I've experienced at my school, and I appreciate that you're all here working on this.
Thank you.
Given me an opportunity, an avenue to enter this field that, to be honest, I wasn't really very versed in when I started law school.
Great. The Teaching Forum is celebrating a major milestone this year. We've reached 10 years, which is kind of amazing to think we've kind of institutionalized this. When I started teaching with Eric Beale at Georgetown 12 years ago, and I was lucky that Eric said yes. We've had a wonderful time, and one of the smartest things we did was to invite Sarah Altschiller to join us. So we've kind of got this fearsome trio, and it's been a wonderful experience, but it has been really enriched by the leadership that Anthony and Joanne Bauer showed in setting up the Teaching Forum to support all of us in identifying and supporting excellence in teaching in this field, and in collaborating with ICAR and other partners to connect it to the real work and the real challenges of the field in real time. So I want to again just acknowledge really the leadership that ICAR shows and how it informs our work on a daily basis, and thank ICAR for supporting our students in the teaching in the many ways we mentioned, and to Melissa for enabling us to do this today, and all of the support to get us to the platform and to enable us to have a good conversation. So thanks everyone for joining, and we'll look forward to continuing the conversation as we go forward.
Do we have till 12:15? Was it 12?
12:15.
So could I?
Oh, we have, oh, I thought we were over time. Sorry. Okay, cut this out of the recording.
That's a wonderful wrap up.
Never mind.
And could I insert, and we'll drop it, cut and paste it before that
Right.
wrap up.
Okay.
I just wanted
Sorry.
to respond
Keep
to
going.
points about the B school. So this is a challenge. It's been a challenge from the beginning. We do have individuals teaching at business schools. We don't have as many people teaching at business schools, but I think there has been progress. At least I've witnessed some progress. I like to say that, in economic terms, B schools are a lagging indicator. There's a lot of demand from students. There's growing demand from students for BHR content at business schools. We're starting to see demand from companies who recruit from business schools for B school students that they want to hire that have been exposed to these issues. And I think the leverage points going forward are businesses asking B schools, we want to hire students that have been exposed to these issues, and the younger generation of faculty. Newer faculty members, I think, are the target to propose courses and to add content to B school corporations. There are some Harvard cases. There's a case on Barrett Gold. There's a case on Yahoo and Google and internet companies in China. And they can be used. And we need to develop, B school tenure track people need to develop more cases. So I don't think it's the content. I think it's the incentives. And we're seeing some progress on the B school side. And to your point on connecting legal education to what advocacy looks like, there are opportunities. Of course, there are clinical offerings, and that's a wonderful way for advocacy organizations to collaborate concretely and tap into law clinics for work on actual projects. Where a lot of the members of the teaching forum are, if we're not teaching at a clinic, we are looking for ways to add experiential components to our teaching. And what a lot of that looks like in-class exercise. Of course, we invite guest speakers and we can invite advocates into the classroom, but we would love to collaborate to develop more in-class exercises or role plays where we ask our students to conduct a human rights impact assessment or to role play what it is engaging with impacted rights holders. So I think that's an opportunity. We're trying to do some of that. We're developing our own materials and exercises, but to the extent that we could collaborate with ICAR members on specific issues and tap their expertise, that's one way to get some of those skills and tools into the non-clinical classroom, which I think is an opportunity.
I think those are all great responses. I think one of the things that I've just to kind of add a coda to the last advocacy legal connection point, I think one of the things that would be really useful for organizations like ICAR that are, recruiting the talent that you're molding and shaping is the skill sets. I would love to see an exercise that has law students in these classes or others, take a look at a piece of legislation or kind of terms of engagement or some of those other pieces and have to provide the bullet points to a non-lawyer about what it does. And with the different audiences, and I would say primarily, a broader advocacy community, but even more so elected officials and leadership. It's very hard, I think, to translate within the nonprofit field what the lawyers, the technocratic language that is required for these policies to what it actually does in a way that you can build widespread support around it, and having law students be able to better navigate those two languages would be extraordinarily helpful to the field, I think.
Thank you for that, Allison. That is that point is well appreciated, I believe, among the BHR teachers, because translating language has been a constant skill set in this field since its inception, and that's a wonderful way to get at it.
And you do it all very well, and ICAR is happy to help partner in whatever way is most useful. And I do, just because I know we now are actually coming to the end of time, want to acknowledge that so much of ICAR's leadership and institutional support of this really was, I think, conceived of, driven, and creatively driven by Meg. And so I just want to honor your contribution there.
Thank you, Allison. That's just incredibly kind and generous of you. And back at you, ICAR it's just thrilling to have you in this position, leading ICAR into the next sort of generation of challenges. One of the things that we've been hoping to do is to bring together our alumni who are now, as we've mentioned, working their way into positions of real authority in these companies and governments and otherwise, and talk about, where are we going? because I think they sometimes self-identify, but sometimes feel a little bit isolated where they are. And we have now created enough of a group of people out there, and if they can find one another, support one another, and link to the ICAR network in particular, I think that will also be a really valuable way forward. But we're looking forward to continuing to collaborate with you. And I think the suggestion about the advocacy training is a really great one. Again, lends itself well to the virtual learning environment we're in. It can be much more dynamic for us, which is really good. And because so many of our students are now all around the globe for a variety of reasons, it also could be a really interesting way to start to surface a number of the challenges locally that they're facing and that are getting less attention. So thank you for that suggestion. Rachel, did you want to make a last comment before we close?
No, I mean, I think it's been a very interesting conversation. I wholeheartedly agree with what you say, Anthony. I mean, I actually teach in the business school because I teach undergraduate at UConn, so I get to see, you know, what students are, you know, what business education looks like. UConn is currently recruiting to a tenure track position in business and human rights in the business school, which I don't know how many such positions exist in the US and outside the US. So there's progress, but there needs to be much more. And I think that was really useful to have that conversation. Generally, yeah, it's been a great hour. So thank you so much for hosting us, and to you, Meg and Anthony, for organizing this.
Well, thanks to ICAR. This is the official close of this session. And thank you again. Bye.
Thank you, and come back next Monday at 9, where there will be more compelling content. And to this point specifically, we really are going to dive into mandatory human rights due diligence and what that looks like in different geographies and political realities. So from traditional MHRDD to using laws like the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act as a model. So stay tuned.
Thanks so much.
Thanks you all.
Bye.
Thank you.